Hi, I'm Teresa from Phoenix Gate Crafts, and today I wanted to talk to all of you crocheters who are thinking about picking up knitting. So knitting is different from crochet. I know it looks like it's the same thing, but it's not. And there are some things that a crocheter gets into knitting expecting that it's just a little bit different. So for those of you who already know how to crochet and are thinking of picking up a different craft, hey, welcome to the club, and just some stuff that'll make the transition a little bit easier. So, first things first, be patient with yourself. Knitting looks like it's a very close relationship to crochet. And it looks like it might be sister crafts. They look like they're that closely related. The truth of it is they're second cousins once removed. And although they look like they're the same thing, they are actually two completely different constructions and structures. And being patient with yourself is going to be critical to success. Because here's what's going to happen. You're going to be like, why am I not getting this? I don't understand this. This feels weird. It feels awful. It's just not clicking. I give up. So don't do that. It's completely different. Your hands move in different ways. They're holding things in different ways. And remembering that crochet is loops within loops. Knitting is loop after loop. And it's a different process for getting a very different result. So be patient with yourself. It might not click right away. You're probably going to have to, experiment a little bit. You're going to need to try and hold things in different ways. You're going to need to use different materials. There's a lot that's going to feel different, weird, awkward, a little bit foreign or alien. And that is totally okay. We all go through it. We're switching gears in our brain and learning a completely new and completely different skill. Some people click with it immediately, and some people like me have to try about a half a dozen times before they're able to get things so that they're able to actually, when you start to feel yourself getting a little frustrated, that's a good time to stop, have a rest, and try again later. Thing number 2, things are going to feel a little bit different, especially with yarn and how you hold your yarn. So a lot of YouTubers who are teaching how to knit really are teaching people who are doing it for the very first time. And for us, some of that is going to feel very strange because there's a couple different ways to knit and hold your yarn. So I know this is going to look reversed to you, but this is my right hand, this is my left hand. When I crochet, I operate the hook with my right hand and I tension the yarn with my left. The way a lot of YouTubers teach is they teach English style, where you've got needles in both hands, but the one you mostly operate is going to be in your right. And then you do what's called throwing, where you throw the yarn with your right by letting go of the needle and then doing your stitch. So you use your right hand to operate the needle and tension the yarn. A lot of crocheters do not find this comfortable. So continental feels a lot more like crochet because you're going to be operating your main needle with your right hand and tensioning with your left. So if you can find somebody who teaches beginning knitting with continental style, you might pick it up a little bit faster. There's also the flicking method, which is kind of a combination between English and continental. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different styles of knitting. You're just going to have to try around and find the one that works for you. But I highly recommend most crocheters find continental knitting to be the easiest. Thing number 3, don't be surprised if suddenly your favorite yarn is no longer your favorite yarn. So knitting and crochet do different things to fabric. Crochet tends to be a little bit stiffer, but it tends to have a little bit more in terms of holes between the stitches. It tends to be naturally a bit more structured. Whereas knitting is a little bit drapier. It's more of a solid fabric usually. And it tends to be knit up a bit slower. So the yarn that works really well for crochet does not necessarily work very well for knitting. And a yarn that works very well for knitting doesn't always work very well for crochet. So because crochet tends to be very fast, a lot of crocheters really like sticking to acrylic and other synthetic fibers, and they tend to shop more at big box stores because when you're using 1, 2, or sometimes even 3 balls of yarn in a single night, you need to have something a little bit less expensive to be able to support that yarn consumption. However, knitting tends to be slower, so you feel the yarn in your fingers a little bit more. And I've noticed that a lot of knitters tend to prefer natural fibers, or at least natural fiber blends, oftentimes wool blends, and they can often afford more expensive yarns because they're not banging through it nearly as quickly. Also, you don't have to worry so much about the roughness of a yarn when you're knitting. Because it's going through your fingers so much more slowly, you're less likely to get yarn rub between your fingers on your tensioning hand. So just be aware that a yarn you hated might be now okay, and a yarn you love might not be quite so suitable. Like when I crochet, I love acrylic. I don't have a problem with it, and it really helps with certain projects to keep expenses under control. You know, I don't mind having an acrylic sweater for Christmas if I'm able to do the acrylic little shapes and things. But when I'm knitting, acrylic doesn't stretch and it feels so much more plasticky to me. So I really don't like working with it when I knit so well, because I really want a yarn that stretches a little bit more, because I'm actually sticking 2 needles into a loop at once, and that little bit of stretch makes it a lot more comfortable for me to knit. Just to give you an example. And each person's a little bit different. So again, you're just going to have to experiment and just realize there might be some differences. Thing number 4, knitting is a million times slower than crochet. So just realize it's going to take 4 flippin' ever to get a project done, especially at the beginning when you are working a lot slower. I have a pretty good hat pattern that I do with crochet, and it usually takes me an hour, maybe an hour and a half to crochet up an adult size hat. I did the year of hats last year for Christmas for my family. And admittedly, they're a little bit more complex, but even so, the fastest hat I managed to complete took me 4 hours. An hour and a half versus 4 hours. That's nearly 3 times as long. And it could be even more when you're first starting out, because you're just going slow because you're learning the steps and you're memorizing the feel. So don't get frustrated with how long it takes you to knit something. Knitting just takes longer. It's the nature of the beast. So good luck with that one. And last but not least, your hands might get sore or blistered in different ways. Let me explain. So knitting and crochet, because they're technically different motions, very likely will use different muscles. When I crochet, there's a lot more tension on my thumb because I really use my thumb as a stabilizer for my hook. But when I knit, I tend to get tired more in the back of my hand. So until your hand develops strength in the new muscles that it's using, you might find that you get tired faster. It's important at that point to take a little bit more time and just let yourself get used to the new motion. You're probably also going to need a few more mental breaks than you normally would when you crochet, and that's because you are learning something completely new. But taking a 5 to 10 minute break about every 20 minutes is probably going to help save your hands from carpal tunnel in the long run, and it'll make it so that you don't feel as much stiffness or soreness the next day. Also, you're probably going to notice that you're going to be getting blisters on different places on your fingers. And this one will be completely unique to you depending on how you tension your yarn, how you guide your needles with your fingers. Like I noticed that my middle finger on my left hand, because I was using it to guide my right hand needle as well as to hold stitches on my left needle, it was getting a lot of rubbing. And eventually what happened was I developed a callus. So some people like to use finger condoms or Band-Aids or medical tape to help prevent rubbing. Personally, as a dancer of 24 years, I don't do that because calluses are your body's natural protection. What you do is you allow the rubbing in that place until it starts to feel kind of red and raw. Not to the point where you actually have a blister, but it looks a little red. It might get slightly puffy, but it definitely doesn't feel comfortable and you're feeling every stitch. That's the perfect time to stop. Later, once it feels normal, so maybe an hour or two later or maybe the next day, go back and keep going until you feel that roughness again. Then stop again, and then just keep your on-off switching thing until one day you'll notice that you're able to go a really long time and you don't feel a single thing. And that's because you've got a callus forming. And once you have the callus, you'll probably be able to knit pretty much as long as you want without feeling any roughness there. And if you stop before you develop a blister, you'll be able to skip the blister stage. Good luck with this endeavor. I hope you enjoy knitting as much as I do, and happy crafting.